The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the ballroom floor like tiny pieces of my dignity. Scattering under crystal chandeliers, for a second, the music stopped. The air turned heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. I could hear nothing but the echo of that sound, the sound of her hand against my cheek, Juliet's hand, my daughter-in-law. On her wedding day, she stood there, radiant in her white gown, trembling with anger and self-importance, her manicured hand still raised in midair, her lips trembling not with guilt. And then she said it, loud enough for every one of the 130 guests to hear. Greater than. That's what you get for being so selfish. A murmur swept through the crowd, the kind of shocked whisper that slithers through silk and champagne. I touched my face. It burned, not from pain, but from disbelief. I had raised my son alone for 30 years. I had survived cancer, widowhood, and countless nights of quiet loneliness. But nothing could have prepared me for this. My own son, Ethan, stood there motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if the mother who had carried him for 9 months and worked 3 jobs to put him through college had suddenly become invisible, greater than. You're not welcome here anymore, Juliet continued. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, even. She smoothed the front of her gown, adjusted her veil, and looked at me like I was an inconvenience that had overstayed its welcome. Greater than. Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better. My apartment, my home, the place Robert and I built from love and sacrifice, now reduced to a wedding gift request from a woman who didn't know the meaning of either. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The entire ballroom watched me silent, uncomfortable, judging. Some looked away, others whispered behind gloved hands, but no one stepped forward to defend me, not even my son. I bent down, trembling, and began to pick up the pieces of my broken glasses from the polished marble floor. The room's reflection warped through the shards' distorted faces, pitying eyes, mocking lips. And in that broken reflection, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Myself. Something inside me, something that had been asleep for years, woke up that night. Because that slap wasn't just a hand across my face. It was a closing door, a cruel awakening. Reminder that silence can only protect people until they decide to destroy you anyway. I walked out of that ballroom with every step echoing like thunder in my ears. The laughter and music resumed behind me, like the world had moved on, leaving me as just another old woman with too much pride and too little power. But they were wrong. I may have looked fragile, small, and humiliated, but my silence had never meant weakness. It meant preparation. In my purse, the same worn black purse Juliet had mocked earlier that evening, lay a small scratched cell phone. I pulled it out with shaking hands and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in over a year. Carlos, I whispered when he answered. It's Aurora. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks ballroom. Immediately. Bring the documents, all of them. His voice was calm but wary. Mrs. Hughes, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air wash over my burning skin. Completely sure, I said. They've left me no choice. I ended the call and stood there by the marble steps, the sound of laughter and champagne spilling through the open doors behind me. I remembered when Juliet first visited my apartment. 2 years ago, her designer heels clicking against my old wooden floors, her polite smile faltering when she saw the second-hand furniture, the simple lace curtains, the faded photos of Robert and me. It's cozy, she had said, her tone dripping with polite disgust. That day I had smiled, because I had already understood the kind of woman she was, one who mistook simplicity for failure and humility for weakness. But I also knew something she didn't. Appearances lie. And mine had been lying for decades beautifully. Deliberately, as I walked toward my car, my hands still trembling, I could feel the whispers follow me like shadows, poor thing. She's losing it at her age. She should be in a home. I didn't turn around. Because in 30 minutes, every one of them would learn the truth. Every whisper would turn into silence. Every cruel smirk would fade. Every mask would fall. For years, Robert and I had lived modestly by choice. We'd seen what greed did to people. So we hid our success behind thrift store clothes and an old sedan. It wasn't shame, it was protection. A secret that had slept quietly until the day my son married. A woman who thought humiliation was a sport. When I reached the parking lot, I sat in my car and watched the ballroom lights shimmer through the night. Warm, deceitful, I pressed a hand to my cheek. It still stung, but beneath that sting, I felt something else rising. Not sadness, not fear, resolve. I thought of Robert. If he were still alive, he'd have smiled that quiet, knowing smile and said, "Don't let them mistake your silence for surrender." Aurora, I closed my eyes and whispered, "I won't." The minutes ticked by slowly. Each one carried the weight of years of swallowed pride and ignored disrespect. 15 minutes after my call, a black sedan pulled up beside mine. Carlos stepped out tall, calm, impeccably dressed, holding a leather briefcase. He looked at me with that same professional compassion he'd always shown. "Are you certain?" he asked again. "Once they see these documents, there's no undoing this." I nodded. "I'm tired of pretending to be small." He handed me a folder, thick, sealed, stamped. Inside it was the truth. The ownership deeds, the trust papers, the stock certificates, everything Robert and I had built, hidden under my name. "They think they're taking my apartment," I said softly, "but tonight, they'll find out they were living off my money all along." Carlos hesitated. "Do you want me to handle the delivery?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'll do it myself." I looked at the glowing ballroom once more. I could almost hear Juliet's laughter, see Ethan's awkward smile, feel the eyes of those guests who had looked at me like I was disposable. In 30 years of living quietly, I had never sought revenge. But sometimes, karma just needs a little help. I stepped out of the car, folder in hand, and began walking back toward the golden doors. Each step felt lighter than the last. Not because the pain had faded, but because for the first time in years, I was walking toward my own power. And as the doors opened, letting the noise of music and laughter spill out again, I whispered to myself, "Let the show begin." People often mistake quiet women for weak ones. Maybe that's why they never see us coming. All my life, I've worn a mask, not of deceit, but of survival. A polite smile, a calm tone, a patient silence that held back storms no one could have imagined. Robert used to say, "Aurora, you don't have to let the world see your crown for it to shine." He was right. And for years I kept that crown hidden, even from my son. Robert and I met in the late 80s. He was a civil engineer with a laugh that could light up a room. And I was a teacher who believed love meant building something together. We had no money at first, just big dreams and secondhand furniture. But Robert had a gift. He saw opportunities where others saw dead ends. While people were complaining about failing industries, he quietly bought land, started small businesses, and made investments that would one day change our lives. He never flaunted it. He didn't believe in gold watches or fancy cars. He believed in freedom, and so did I. We promised each other something simple. If we ever became rich, no one, not even our family, would know. Not out of arrogance, but protection. Because money changes people. It turns love into expectation, and gratitude into resentment. When Ethan was born, we decided he'd grow up like any other kid. Public school, no private tutors, no expensive toys. We wanted him to know the value of effort, not entitlement. But as the years passed, that decision came with a price. He saw other kids with brand new sneakers and shiny gadgets, and he thought we were less. He used to say, "Mom, why can't we just have nice things for once?" And I'd smile, pack his lunch, and tell him, because the nicest things in life are built, not bought. But as he grew older, that smile stopped working. When Robert died, Ethan was 26, smart, ambitious, but restless. He loved his father deeply, but he didn't inherit Robert's patience. He wanted success now. I gave him a job at one of our shell companies, quietly, without revealing it was ours. He thought he'd earned it through a connection. I let him believe that. But that's the thing about hiding wealth. You also hide yourself. To Ethan, I was just his middle-class mother, struggling to make ends meet, living modestly in an old apartment. He had no idea that the mortgage, the insurance, even his wedding were all paid from accounts under my quiet signature. Sometimes I wondered if I'd done him a disservice. Maybe if I'd shown him the truth, he'd have respected me more. But then again, maybe he'd have turned into someone I wouldn't recognize. The first time I met Juliet, I knew, you know that feeling? The kind that crawls up your spine when you meet someone who smiles too wide. She was polite at first, sweet, even. But sweetness without warmth is just sugar on glass. She called me Mrs. Hughes for the first 6 months. Her compliments always had edges. You make lovely for someone who doesn't use a food processor. Ethan says you're good with budgets. I guess that's why you live so simply. Each word sounded innocent, but they were laced with quiet disdain. She measured people by what they wore, not what they carried inside. And Ethan, blinded by love, didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. I remember the night she invited me over for dinner. 2 weeks after their engagement. Her apartment looked like a furniture catalog. Perfect, sterile, cold. As she poured the wine, she said casually, "Ethan tells me you still live in the same old place. Isn't it hard, being alone there?" I smiled. "Not at all. I like peace. It's the one luxury money can't always buy." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, I wouldn't know. I've never had to live without it." That night, when I drove home, I told myself to forgive her. She was young, insecure, and spoiled, a dangerous combination, but forgivable. Still, a whisper inside me said, because disrespect, once planted, always grows. Months before the wedding, I began noticing changes in Ethan. He stopped visiting as often. When he did, he seemed distracted, impatient. One evening, I asked him gently, "Is something bothering you, sweetheart?" He sighed, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, Juliet just wants us to have space. You know, start our own life." I nodded, pretending not to be hurt. But then he added, "She thinks your apartment could be practical, just until we find a bigger place." I stared at him, my own son asking for my home like it was a piece of furniture. He must have read the shock on my face, because he quickly said, "You could stay with Aunt Marlene for a while. You wouldn't be alone." That night, I sat on my couch, surrounded by memories, Robert's books, Ethan's childhood photos, the ticking clock we bought at a yard sale. Every item in that home was a piece of my life, and they wanted to trade it for convenience. That was the moment I decided to stop pretending. If they wanted my home, they'd have to take everything that came with it, including the truth. I called Carlos that night, my late husband's old partner and the only man who knew everything. He hesitated when I told him what I planned. "Greater than Aurora, are you sure you want them to know?" I said quietly. "They need to. Maybe it's time I remind them who they're dealing with." The weeks before the wedding were a blur of rehearsals, fittings, and subtle humiliation. Juliet left me out of decisions, changed the guest list without telling me, and publicly corrected me whenever she could. But I stayed calm, because revenge tastes best when it's served from a steady hand. On the morning of the wedding, I dressed in a simple blue gown, the same one I wore to Robert's last birthday dinner. Juliet had asked me not to wear white, not to sit too close to the front, and not to draw attention. I obeyed every word, because that's what masks do. They make people underestimate you. And the more she mocked me, the deeper she dug her own grave. I remember standing near the reception table that night, holding a cup of tea, when Juliet brushed past me and whispered, "Don't embarrass Ethan tonight. We have important people here." I smiled. I wouldn't dream of it. She didn't know that. Carlos had already arrived, blending in quietly among the guests. a briefcase tucked under his arm. Inside it were the deeds, the trust, everything she and Ethan thought they controlled. And that's when it happened. The slap. The one moment that broke the mask completely, but maybe that was necessary. Because people don't listen to silence. Sometimes they need a sound loud enough to wake them. When I left that ballroom, I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking toward a truth long overdue. For 30 years, I'd hidden behind humility. Now it was time to show them that modesty is not the same as submission. And as the night deepened and Carlos's headlights disappeared down the street, I realized something. I didn't lose control that evening. I reclaimed it. The slap wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my revelation. They say revenge is dangerous because it changes you. But I've learned something different. Revenge doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. When you finally stop apologizing for it. The morning after the wedding, the newspapers were full of photos. The radiant couple, the sparkling ballroom, the champagne toasts. No one mentioned the scene that had unfolded in the corner of that room. An old woman slapped by her. They didn't see it as newsworthy, because humiliation is only interesting when it happens to someone powerful. And in their eyes, I was just an aging widow, invisible, ordinary, forgettable, perfect. Because invisibility is the best camouflage a woman can wear. Juliet didn't call me. Neither did Ethan. For 3 weeks, there was silence, not even a text, not a word of apology. Then, one evening, I received a formal letter in a white envelope. The return address said, Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Hughes. I opened it slowly, expecting an apology. Instead, it was a legal notice. They were requesting that I vacate the property within 30 days to allow the rightful owners to take possession. Rightful owners. I smiled. The audacity almost impressed me. I picked up the phone and called Carlos. It's time, I said softly. Let's give them what they think they want. 2 days later, Juliet arrived at my apartment. She didn't come alone. She brought Ethan and a real estate agent. She didn't even knock properly, just waltzed in, perfume first, wearing a smirk that could curdle cream. We just came to take some measurements, she said sweetly. You understand, right? It's not personal. I looked at her, really looked. She was flawless, confident, untouched by humility. But underneath the layers of designer fabric, I saw the tremor in her left hand. Powerful people don't tremble. Pretenders do. I poured tea for them. Old habits die hard. And listened as she described her plans for renovations. This wall's too plain, she said. We'll open it up. Maybe get rid of that tacky chandelier. The chandelier Robert had chosen on our anniversary. The one we bought secondhand, cleaned for hours, and hung ourselves. My heart pinched, but I didn't show it. Instead, I smiled gently. It's all yours, dear. Just make sure you sign the paperwork first. She blinked. Paperwork. Of course, I said, walking to my study. You'll need a legal transfer from the property trustee. I pulled out a folder identical to the one I'd shown Carlos. Except this one wasn't the real deal. It was a decoy, perfectly crafted, full of polite lies. Juliet scanned it quickly, her eyes sparkling with victory. So this means it's officially ours. Yes, I said softly, watching her sign. Every inch. Ethan hesitated. Mom, are you sure you're okay with this? I looked at him, my boy, grown, but still blind. Of course, sweetheart. You're my son. You deserve the best. And that's how the perfect lie began. The following week, I quietly moved out. At least that's what they thought. In truth, I simply relocated to one of Robert's old estates under a different name. The apartment they took was never truly theirs, because, as Carlos reminded me with a smile, they signed a lease agreement, not an ownership deed. They're your tenants now, Aurora. Tenants? The word rolled around my tongue like justice wrapped in silk. From that point on, I played my part perfectly. I didn't call. I didn't interfere. I let them settle in, redecorate, brag to their friends. Juliet began posting pictures online. Our new home, building our dream together. People congratulated her, and I watched, silently, patiently, until the first rent notice arrived. Carlos had arranged it beautifully, a professional letter from the management firm, stating the monthly payment amount and terms. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Hughes, tenants. I wish I could have seen her face when she read it. Ethan called me first, his voice strained. "Mom, this must be a mistake. We own the place." "Oh," I said calmly. "I thought you just moved in temporarily." Juliet said the papers were signed. "They were," I interrupted gently. "Elise, dear, I'm still the owner. You agreed to pay rent?" Silence. Long, uncomfortable. Then he whispered, "Mom, why would you do this?" I took a deep breath, greater than, "Because, Ethan, you and your wife taught me something valuable. Never assume kindness is weakness." Juliet called next. She didn't bother hiding her rage. "You tricked us, you bitter old woman. You think this is funny?" "No," I said softly. "Funny is what you looked like signing a lease you didn't read." She hung up on me. But not before I heard the sound of glass breaking in the background, her anger shattering like my glasses had that night. Weeks passed. Their dream home turned into a financial nightmare. The rent wasn't small. It matched the luxury Juliet insisted on living in. She sold her car first, then the jewelry. But pride is expensive. Ethan visited once. He looked tired, thinner, older. He stood at my door like a child again. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We made a mess of things." I poured him tea, the same kind I'd made on the night of the wedding. "You didn't make a mess," I said. "You just forgot who you were raised to be." He looked down, ashamed. "She wants to leave. She says it's your fault." "Maybe it is," I said softly. "Sometimes it takes a little pain to show people what kind of life they've built." That night, I sat on my porch and watched the moon rise. It was full, quiet, unbothered by the chaos of the earth below. And I realized something. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted them to learn. Revenge is rarely about punishment. It's about reflection. Making someone see the mirror they've avoided all along. A month later, I received an invitation, hand-delivered. It was from Juliet. It read, "Dinner at our place. We owe you an apology." I smiled, because sometimes the best victories don't need witnesses. When I arrived, the apartment looked different. Stripped, quieter, humbler. Juliet opened the door herself. Her makeup was minimal, her voice soft. "Mrs. Hughes," she said, "I'm sorry, I was cruel." I looked around. No expensive decor, no arrogance. Just two people standing in the wreckage of their pride. I touched her arm gently. "Apology accepted. But next time you raise your hand to someone, make sure it's to help them stand, not to put them down." Her eyes filled with tears. Ethan stood behind her, silent. He didn't need to say anything. He understood. That night, as I left, I felt no triumph. I wasn't the same woman who walked out of that ballroom weeks ago. That woman was wounded. This one was free. And yet, part of me smiled, thinking of Robert. He'd have been proud, not of the revenge, but of the strength it took to do it with grace. Sometimes the perfect lie isn't one that hurts others. It's the one that protects the truth until the world is ready to hear it. There are moments in life that split time in half, before and after. For me, that moment came exactly 1 month after Juliet's fake apology dinner. I was sitting by the window of my small estate in Rosewood Hills, sipping tea when my phone began to ring. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me already knew. I let it ring twice before answering. Greater than "Mrs. Hughes," a man's voice said. "This is Daniel Foster from the City Gazette. We'd like to confirm a few details for our upcoming feature." "Feature?" I asked softly. "Greater than—" "Yes, ma'am. Your foundation, the Hughes Women's Housing Trust. It's one of the largest privately funded charities in the state, and we'd love a comment from its founder before publishing." I almost laughed. Not because of pride, but because of how poetic life can be. For years, I had hidden behind modest clothes. An old car, a quiet job at a flower shop. People assumed that was all there was to me, and I had let them. Because humility isn't weakness, it's armor. The next day, the story broke. The secret philanthropist of Rosewood Hills, the widow who gave millions. My name was right there. Aurora Hughes, founder, benefactor, owner of multiple charitable trusts and properties. Within hours, my phone flooded with calls. Reporters, former neighbors, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. But one name stood out: Ethan. He called at 7:42 p.m., his voice shaking. Greater than, Mom, what is this? The papers are they talking about you? Yes, darling, I said calmly. They're a bit late, but better late than never. Silence. Then a long, broken exhale. Greater than, why didn't you tell me? I looked out the window, the sunset painting gold across the sky. The same gold I had given up years ago for peace. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have. He didn't respond immediately. I could hear him swallow hard, like a child trying not to cry. Greater than, Mom, Juliet's. She's embarrassed. Everyone's talking. She says people are calling her a gold digger. People are only saying what she showed them, I said softly. But tell her this, humility never goes out of style. The next morning, my lawyer, Carlos, arrived at my estate with a small smile. Greater than, you've made the front page of every paper, he said, handing me a stack. Each headline told the same story. An old widow who had quietly funded housing projects, schools, and medical programs for underprivileged women for over a decade. I hadn't done it for recognition. Robert and I made a promise long ago: give, but never boast. But now, the truth was public, and it came at the perfect time. Greater than, they'll be calling soon, Carlos said. He was right. By noon, I received an invitation. A charity gala at the same ballroom where Juliet had slapped me. They wanted me as the guest of honor. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my late husband's study. For years, I had worn soft colors, blending in with the wallpaper of life. But tonight, I chose black silk, elegant. As I put on Robert's diamond pendant, the only piece of jewelry I ever kept. You'd laugh if you saw this, Robert. The same ballroom, the same people. But this time, I'm not the one being watched. When I arrived, the crowd went silent, the same silence that had once followed Juliet's slap. But this time, it wasn't pity. It was awe. The orchestra stopped playing for a second as heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's her. Aurora Hughes, the woman who owns half of Rosewood Hills, the one Juliet insulted. I didn't need to speak. My presence said enough. Juliet and Ethan stood near the buffet, both pale as marble. Juliet's perfect composure was gone. She looked smaller somehow, almost fragile. When our eyes met, she froze. I walked up slowly, my heels echoing against the marble floor, a rhythm of justice measured in quiet steps. Mrs. Hughes, she stammered, didn't expect to see you here. Oh, but I was invited, I said gently. Apparently, people think I've done something good. Ethan looked down, shame written all over his face. Mom, please, we never meant. Don't apologize, Ethan, I interrupted softly. You both gave me a gift that night. You reminded me who I am. Juliet's voice trembled. I don't expect forgiveness, but I am sorry. I studied her for a long moment. There were no tears, just truth. And that, in itself, was progress. Juliet, I said, forgiveness isn't something you ask for, but tonight, you'll have to excuse me. I have a speech to give. The master of ceremonies introduced me. The lights dimmed, and I walked onto the stage where Juliet had once stood as a bride. Good evening, I began. A year ago, I stood in this very room as a guest, unnoticed, unwanted, and humiliated. Tonight, I stand here not to seek revenge, but to remind every woman in this room of something simple. Never let anyone decide your worth. The room was utterly still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. kindness is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And humility, I paused, is not the same as invisibility. I glanced at Ethan and Juliet, who stood quietly among the crowd, faces glistening under the chandelier light. The people who hurt you may never understand the depth of what they've done, I continued, but that doesn't mean you owe them bitterness. Sometimes, the best revenge is rebuilding yourself so gracefully that they can't recognize the person they tried to break. Applause erupted soft at first. I smiled gently, feeling the tears finally fall, not from pain, but from release. After the speech, people surrounded me, shaking my hand, thanking me, asking for photos. But my eyes were only on two faces in the back. Ethan looked at me with pride, the kind he hadn't shown in years. Juliet, for once, didn't hide behind confidence. She simply nodded, a small, quiet acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. As I left the ballroom, the same chandelier sparkled above me. But this time, it wasn't mocking me, it was reflecting me. Outside, under the soft glow of the city lights, Carlos was waiting by the car. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like the circle's complete. Revenge wasn't the goal, Carlos, it was the awakening." He smiled. "You've always had a way of turning wounds into wisdom." I looked up at the sky, whispering to myself, sometimes the universe doesn't need you to fight back. It just needs you to stay still long enough for the truth to catch up. And that night, the night of the gala, stayed with me for days, not because of the applause or the cameras. It stayed because of something much smaller. A look. Ethan's look. He didn't say much after my speech, but as I walked out, he followed me to the car, his hands trembling like a boy trying to find his mother in a crowd. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't know how blind I was. I thought I was protecting Juliet, but I ended up hurting the one person who's always protected me. I touched his cheek the same way I did when he was 10, crying over a lost baseball game. "You don't need to say more," I said softly. "I already know. You're my son, and that will never change." He wanted to say more, but I stopped him. Because sometimes, silence heals faster than words ever could. 2 weeks later, I found myself back in the study. The same quiet room where Robert and I had written our will years ago. Back then, we thought wealth was something you passed down. Now I knew better. You don't pass down money. You pass down lessons through love, through loss, through the things you choose to forgive. I opened the drawer and pulled out a single envelope. The handwriting was mine. On the front, it said simply, "For Ethan and Juliet to be opened when I'm gone." It wasn't morbid, it was closure. Life went on quietly, peacefully, beautifully. I spent my mornings at the community center, my afternoons with the garden girls, women who had found new homes through my foundation. They called me Miss Aurora, and I called them my daughters. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone. And then, one spring morning, I didn't wake up. They said it was peaceful, a soft heart that had finally earned its rest. 3 weeks later, Ethan and Juliet sat in my lawyer's office, both silent. Carlos, my ever-loyal friend, opened the envelope and began to read aloud, "My dearest Ethan and Juliet, if you're reading this, it means my time has come, but don't be sad. I've had more joy than pain, and more love than I ever deserved. But before I go, there are things I need you both to understand. Ethan, my son, you were my light in the darkest rooms. You made my world worth living after Robert passed. I don't blame you for forgetting my worth, because life, marriage, and pride can cloud even the kindest hearts. But you must never let anyone else define what love looks like again. It's not obedience. It's not silence. It's courage and truth. Juliet, you came into our lives like a storm. You broke things, yes, but storms also bring rain, and sometimes that rain grows gardens. I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I never wanted you to carry that weight forever. You will spend your life trying to earn peace, so start today. Now for the truth neither of you knew. Everything I owned, the foundation, the houses, the The trusts was placed in a fund long ago. You will inherit none of it directly, but you will manage it, if you choose. The Hughes Women's Housing Trust will now be co-directed by both of you. You will not live off the money, you will live through it. You will build homes, feed families, and learn what love means when it's not about yourself. I don't want statues or stories. I just want you both to find your way back, not to me, but to each other, because family isn't about who you came from. It's about who you decide to hold on to, even after the damage. With love, Aurora. When Carlos finished reading, the room was silent. Ethan's eyes glistened, and Juliet's mascara smudged as she pressed her hand over her mouth. She forgave me, Juliet whispered. After everything. She forgave me. Carlos nodded gently. Greater than. She didn't just forgive you. Mrs. Hughes, she trusted you. That trust broke something in Juliet, and rebuilt something, too. Over the next few years, they did exactly what Aurora had hoped. Ethan left his corporate job and devoted himself to the foundation. Juliet, once obsessed with status, began managing shelters personally, teaching young women how to rebuild their confidence, how to start small businesses, how to believe again. The community called them the Hughes legacy, but they always corrected people. Greater than. It's not our legacy, Juliet would say quietly. It's Aurora's lesson. 5 years later, on the anniversary of Aurora's passing, a statue was unveiled outside the new Hughes Women's Center. Not a grand one, just a life-sized bronze figure of a woman sitting on a bench, smiling softly, holding a small cup of tea. The plaque read, Aurora Hughes, 1948 to 2023. She built homes, not walls. She left love, not bitterness. And in the end, she taught us that silence can roar louder than revenge. Ethan stood with his arm around Juliet as the crowd clapped. A small girl from the shelter, about 10 years old, placed a flower on the statue's lap. Greater than. Who was she? The girl asked. Juliet smiled, tears catching in the sunlight. Greater than. She was the kind of woman who made broken people believe in beginnings again. That night, Juliet walked alone to the garden behind the center, Aurora's favorite place. The stars shimmered, and the wind carried the faint smell of roses. She sat on a stone bench and whispered into the air, Aurora, I hope you can see what you started. I hope you know I'm trying. And maybe, just maybe, she heard something, not in words, but in the soft sway of the leaves. I know, child. I know Aurora never sought revenge. She didn't need to. She taught the world something far greater. That the sweetest justice isn't to destroy those who wronged you, but to outgrow the pain they caused. Her legacy wasn't wealth, it was wisdom. And in that quiet truth, in that calm, unshakable grace, she became what every broken soul hopes to be one day.